my first in-person conference after pandemic, so I'm a bit nervous, but lovely to be here. And welcome to this panel session. I'm Merve. I'm head of academic partnerships and research and data science team in LV General Insurance. And on the panel today, we have Graeme and Arslan. And Graeme is from Popsa. He's a machine learning software engineer. And Awan is from Tesco Bank, and he is senior data science engineer. Do you guys want to say a few words about Popsa and Tesco Bank as well before we dig into questions?
Yeah, sure. So Popsa has been on the list of the top 10 fastest growing tech companies in the UK the last couple of years, and this year we were in the top 20 in Europe for all companies according to the FT. Our goal is that our customers, it's the easiest way for our customers to print their memories. So we do photo books and calendars, and we want people to be able to create something that looks really good in under 5 minutes. Some of the things I've been working on recently are event detection, which went live this year. So it's a suggested album feature, we call it, and some updates to our automated titles, which are coming soon.
Thank you. It's pretty loud. Anyway, everybody in this room should know about Tesco, I'm hoping, because you're in retail. And I work in the Tesco Bank side. So we are the subsidiary which used to work with RBS before, but now it's under the umbrella of Tesco. We deal primarily with retail credit and insurance, home insurance, pet insurance, that kind of thing. There's a big project going on at Tesco at the moment, which I'm kind of heading, in terms of being more collaborative with other branches of Tesco. So we're going to have a group data sharing platform with the stores, the mobile, the bank, hopefully share the data and get better models.
Okay. Well, thank you both. So I have a list of questions for us to discuss, and probably like the last 5 to 10 minutes, we'll open it to all of you to ask us questions, or you can add your comments to the questions that we're going to discuss. So yeah, without further ado, let's dig in. So basically, it's understood and known that the rise of automation has a huge impact on the way businesses operate. But what would you say is the biggest impact in your line of business, or even smaller scale, your companies?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really the customer-facing stuff. I guess for other companies, the kind of more back-of-house efficiencies and marketing efficiencies are very big, and I guess some of that comes to us as well. But we're really focused on making life easier for customers, and other examples would be kind of recommendation engines. But what we've been doing is trying to take the time and the difficulty out of creating the products that people come to us for, and that's how we kind of drive the top line growth and the margins.
Yeah, not speaking on behalf of Tesco Bank, but in my current job, we're able to approve a lot more customers who are applying for credit. This is stuff I've heard, but I've never experienced. But apparently, there were very strange rules in place in retail banking industry previously, where people would get disproved for all sorts of reasons which nobody could explain, and it was primarily being made by commercial guys and departments which were not really leveraging data at all. It was purely someone saying, I know better, and let's disprove this guy, because from my own experience, these sort of people don't really pay back the money in time or default, etc., etc. But with data, we're able to approve a lot more customers. We're able to individualize a lot better. So we're able to cater to specific needs of people because, Tesco has a very big customer base, and customers are going through all sorts of life experiences and things like that, and they all need a bit of help at different stages in life. And with the use of data, we're able to sort of form clusters and form sort of even more granular than clusters, and tend to individual needs for those customers. I mean, apart from the banking side of it, in my previous life, I used to be a data consultant for other companies. I've worked with JLR, I've worked with other Microsoft subsidiaries, etc., etc. And with data, like, it's not enough to just think about one specific department in the company that you're working with. With data, you can basically cater to end-to-end cycle of starting from supply chain, all the way how you deliver it to customers, after-sales service, et cetera, and all of that can be dealt with data. And this ability to leverage this data, I think, is a big step which wasn't available to us before. Yeah, I'm sure it's probably the same at LV. Yeah.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. I can basically echo what both of you mentioned, especially for LV. I mean, it's a bit of like an advert line with UK's best loved insurance company, but that puts a lot of pressure in terms of like how we serve back to our customers. So with automation, more, specifically around data and machine learning, it is to make all the processes and services we're actually giving back to the customers more efficient and more efficient use of the limited human resource, for example. But the other thing I personally experienced since I switched from academia to industry as well, like the perception of how of the basic perception of AI and machine learning changing across the business. From being, it is here to steal our jobs, to it is here to actually assist us and help us in the decision-making process. So that's one of the actually impacts that I've experienced over the more you work, the more models you actually productionize and work with the stakeholders across the business. That barrier is also a bit broken in a way. Have you guys experienced any of that, or do you want to add to it?
Would you say that's the case for the entire hierarchy in your organization? So at all levels, are people feeling, data is here to steal our jobs, or are people feeling, maybe data can be useful, but we might lose some people in turn? Is that the case for you guys, or across the entire hierarchy, or no?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right,
and it's more like, so the LV data science team has been around almost for 5 years. So initially, and I've been there for the past 3.5 years. So I remember when I first joined, it was more like, okay, so how is it all going to work, like end to end, especially when you have human in the loop. And then when you actually have everyone on board making those decisions, then you kind of almost address fears of the people and show that, look, we're here to create a tool for you to use. So then it definitely changed. And now everyone kind of comes with problems and, we actually have this problem. Can you guys help us to improve what we're doing or help us solve this specific problem? So yeah, definitely the case.
I think it's a really important thing to address. And I think if you look at the history of technology, when these things have happened, these kind of technological revolutions have happened, people always fear that, but in the end, it just becomes a really useful productivity tool.
Yeah.
And I think eventually someone's going to invent something that will really democratize it, like the Excel or the Photoshop of AI. It's just going to become a productivity tool for all kinds of jobs, really. So yeah.
Fear of the unknown a bit, I guess, because we don't know initially, but you actually make it more accessible. You explain what's actually happening and how it can be beneficial to everyone. Then it really brings people together. So in terms of future developments, what are you anticipating in companies to become basically more data driven?
Personally, I think actually become data driven. So across the field, the general consensus is we're still sort of very hypothesis based, where somebody will think of something and suggest, this might be useful, and then somebody goes and explore it, and you do some experimentation along the way, and maybe come out of it with either, yes, that was useful, or that wasn't useful. But I think the essence of being data-driven is actually to not come up with hypotheses in the first place, and actually let the data drive the entire process from end to end. So, of course, you need to do some sort of data engineering and some data wrangling at the beginning, sure, but let the data come into the model and let it guide the model in whatever direction it wants to go to. And I think that is truly what being data-driven means, as opposed to still hypothesis testing.
Also probably like generate almost like real-time insights.
Yeah.
Not even without the model, just some sort of reporting tools, maybe to some decision makers. This is one thing we've experienced sometimes, like when the business actually comes to us saying, we actually have this data science problem, we need a model. Okay, so what is your problem? And when we start actually talking, we realize it is not, you don't need a model for that. You just need some of the data sources to be linked to your source system to give you real-time insights. No, not even some form of analysis. You just need that data coming in for some cases. For other cases, you just need almost like a summary of that data to directly impact your decisions on the go. So that's also actually as valuable, and quite often actually it might be the very initial first step to solve or improve a few of the processes, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, when you're data driven, a lot of the times the problems actually arise within the data itself. The data tells you what the problems are. Like, I think there's like, it's not just the retail industry, it's like most of industries, because people don't really trust data, they don't really trust the explainability of models, they don't really trust how a model is reaching some conclusion, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a big backlash against, oh, can we really trust this model? Should we actually be fully data-driven? And a lot of companies are failing to actually understand that the data should be driving your problems. The data should be telling you, these are your problems. When you fetch data from customers, those are the actual customer needs, just hidden within that data, embedded in that data, and all you're trying to do is get it out of there. And if a model is required to help solve that problem, then so be it. If it isn't, something like a business insight tool will probably fix that problem for you.
I think one thing that would really help, and does really help in some organizations, is to have data science really embedded in every single department, every single function, solving business problems and kind of getting that domain knowledge that allows people to come up with ideas for projects that they wouldn't have come up with before, instead of being kind of like siloed and people just coming to you with problems.
Yeah, that's again one thing we're doing. So in LV, our data science team. So just a bit of background, because I didn't give much of background of the LV data science team. We're more than 50 people in LV data science team, a mix of data scientists, engineers, and a small group of data analysts. And the way we work is like an internal consultancy to the rest of the business function. So it can be from claims to pricing and underwriting. And we have like a nice pipeline that any other business function can actually come and tell us about their problems, submit their problems, and we work together with them because they are the domain experts. And you can't do data science in silo. Because you really need to understand what their problem is, but they also know about their data as well. So even if when you're doing, like, say, EDA, if you identify some anomalies that you think are anomalies, you can just go back and ask the domain experts and learn and realize, oh, okay, actually, that's not how I thought it would be. And data actually makes sense. It's just I'm not the expert to make that call.
Would you say your pipeline would work cross-departmental?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of like other business functions coming and approaching us with their use case questions, yes, it is. It does.
I think you're privileged then, because a lot of companies aren't in a position where they can just take in other departments. So currently, like I said, we're working with the stores, the bank, Tesco Mobile, etc. And it's quite difficult. Well. It's very difficult, because each one of them has their own legacy technology, and in order to actually put it all together, it's a big ask.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the challenge. And in terms of when you guys were answering the questions, I was also thinking about the data. So, the garbage in, garbage out situation to the models. What do you think about how are the companies actually future-proofing themselves in terms of ensuring that data quality, for example? How are they collecting data? How are they storing it? I personally started seeing a bit of a shift. Like the hype around, okay, we need to build a perfect model is kind of dying down, and people are being more realistic, saying, well, actually, we should probably check if the data we're collecting is answering our needs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have just kind of chuck data into a bucket, and then they come to use it and they think, actually, no, this is a nightmare, because even if it's structured, it might not be structured in exactly the right way to load it into a database, and then you have some horrible ETL job to clean up the special characters and change the folder structure, etc., etc. So yeah, I'm always a big advocate for thinking very carefully from the start about how you're going to store it and exactly what use cases might be in the future, and the different types of databases you might want to load it into, and just trying to save that pain in the future, because somebody once said 80% of data projects are just
cleaning up all this data. So it's a huge cost. And, something that this is better to plan.
Yeah, definitely. Anything
Well,
to add,
I think,
Arslan?
again, my own opinion, but I think around 2017, 2018, there was a big push for companies to hire data scientists, and they were all going after the hype, the buzz of machine learning data, and they soon realized that these data scientists didn't actually have any data to work with. There weren't any pipelines. The data existed, but the data wasn't available for these data scientists to actually make use of. And now we're seeing a shift in even like the recruitment industry itself, that a lot more job roles are being advertised for data engineers and even cloud engineers as opposed to data scientists. And yeah, that's why I'm a data science engineer and not a data scientist. Yeah.
Not like the whole MLOps thing. Process, because there are different ways of making use of the models that you're building, but one of it is obviously like deploying it live and letting it return live scores to either a source system or directly to a human decision maker for the whole end-to-end process, or basically to make an automatic decision as well. So there's also a shift towards.
Yeah. The actual modeling part is kind of the minority of the job, really, isn't it?
I think from what you're talking about, I think it would be good to say differentiate what exactly in retail are we talking about, because the data source, the data well, or the velocity of this data, or even the variety of this data, where it's coming from, that will vary massively, not just because of the business problem, but a lot of times because of regulatory policies.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm sure the regulations that you have to abide by, some of them might be similar to our insurance function, but other times they are really strict. They're really tight.
It is, yeah.
And, I would say sometimes it actually stops you from becoming data-driven, but maybe that's because the policies haven't caught up with the modern-day technology, something like that. But they're there for a reason, I would say. They're there to maybe protect the end customer. But yeah, I think we should probably differentiate what exactly we mean when we're talking about retail. And I mean, within this room, right, I'm sure there's people from all sides of retail. Even in the talks I've heard this morning, I've only been able to listen to 2 of them, and they were so different. And
exactly,
the business problem was so different. So
and not even just for data as well, like the models that you're building, like the level of explainability that you need to include in your models. If you are working, anyone else in this room are working for a heavily regulated industry, it kind of adds an extra level of challenge, which I personally enjoy, because and you just can't chuck everything in, and need to be kind of mindful, even more so for that. But so how do you both think that companies can be best prepared to stay on top of all the changes and all like the advances happening in like coming directly maybe from academia or like commercial companies driving and change and all of this like novelty, because everything is changing at a very, very high pace. So how can companies actually stay on top of all of that? Any food for thought? Any advice?
As I said before, kind of being like really embedded in solving business problems, helps. But yeah, I think, as you say, there's almost kind of too much to keep up with, isn't there? So I think it's really important to give people time to go to conferences and read papers and do your journal club and that kind of thing. Yeah,
definitely.
I would say be more open-minded for the data. So I think if all functions of the business are data literate at all levels, so I'm talking all the way from C-suite to all the way, I don't know, developers or whoever is the final, whoever is working in the release pipelines. This entire process needs to be data literate, because a lot of the times the business decisions are bound by the cost and operation model of it, the funding for it especially. So, modern day use cases, we need access to clouds, we need Azure, we need AWS, whatever we need. Who's going to fund for it? Once you can prove value, the business sort of runs itself, i.e., you can put the money back in. But it's that initial leap of faith which a lot of companies are not willing to take. And I think data literacy programs and organization-wide, I guess, data philosophy would probably help with that a lot.
Yeah. I'll actually get back to that, but before I kind of wanted to add to the question myself as well, to be better prepared in terms of like being part of the conference and the journal clubs and everything. One thing I am personally and want to consider myself an advocate of is bringing academia closer to industry, or vice versa, basically. Closing that, I've read somewhere it's called Valley of Death, the gap between industry and academia. And I personally seen a huge value of that as well. It's not even, commissioning a piece of research in academia. It's like a full knowledge exchange throughout the life cycle of that project. We have a big collaborative partnership with University of Bristol, for example, for the past 3 years, and that's one of the things we're actually looking for when we are working on a project. So a few members of our team would be embedded in that project, so that you can kind of see also like the incremental, not results, but like output coming from the project, and it's not necessarily like a academically novel outcome, but that knowledge that the team is also learning is upskilling the team, retaining talent, the critical thinking changes, you start asking different questions. So I personally saw that bringing a huge impact as well. And again, being open and being here, like for example, Graeme was saying, just discussing and seeing what everyone else is doing, what's out there, impacts.
It's a great source of talent as well, isn't it? It can be quite hard to find people sometimes, and you can even just doing an internship or sponsoring a project. It's a great way.
And you also get to see how those people fit in your team. Basically, working on a more shorter project. So that's hugely valuable. But coming back to what Arslan was saying about the buy-in almost from the business. So how do you get a buy-in from the business at any level? If you are to propose a project, or in terms of, say, let's take the machine learning projects again as an example. How is the buy-in in your companies at different levels? From the end user, if there's human in the loop, if that user is going to use the model, to the C-suite?
I think it takes time. It takes a long time for everybody to buy in. I think there needs to be probably a shift in business philosophy, I suppose. So, your point about businesses being ingrained more academically, I think there's a clear difference between how academia and corporate world operates, I suppose.
There is.
Yeah. Academia, values itself as being robust, putting all, exploring all the avenues before you can actually go out, before you can actually publish something. Whereas corporate world is, if it works, just do it. And if it generates value, if it generates money, because businesses are there to generate money at the end of the day, right? And if they can make that money, then the product will sell itself, right? I don't know about other retail industries, but from the ones I have seen, it generally tends to be either a new talent coming into the company and bringing in new ideas with them, business higher-ups seeing value from other projects and then deciding, okay, let's fund additional projects and maybe that will bring in some value.
Leading by an example.
Precisely, yeah. Or the most common one is the competitor does it and then they have to do it, which I think is the case, right? It's the competitive market. So I mean, in the retail industry, we have Monzo, Revolut, et cetera. These are purely data-driven companies. All the other retail banks are now going to have to keep up with them, and your hand is almost forced to go in a particular direction as opposed to other companies.
What about you, Graeme? It's like a quite different dynamic, I would assume, like Tesco versus Popsa.
I've always been quite lucky working in very kind of data-driven companies. I've never had to kind of advocate too hard, but I think a lot of the things we've been talking about definitely help, like focusing on explainability of models. So if something's a black box and people get a bit scared about that, even if there's no regulatory issues, it's just kind of like understanding how it works, making sure it's not going to do anything crazy, especially if it's very customer facing.
Yeah.
Then kind of addressing any kind of sensitivities with talking to other functions, other departments about is this going to steal my job, that kind of thing. And also actually having a strong product function I think helps as well. Like the people, their product managers can go and kind of advocate for these things and maybe kind of explain things in a different way than someone who's very technical might explain them. Then that's very helpful.
Yeah, and from personal experience as well, one thing again to reiterate what I think Arslan, you mentioned that about data literacy, just making every level of the business just to understand what machine learning is, what it isn't, for example. So again, opening up that black box unknown helps a lot. Integrating model end users and stakeholders from very early on in the process is again a huge, I think, help, because then you're not saying, well, no, I'm going to actually bring you a model that I think and I believe would improve what you're doing. It's more like, okay, let's build it together. Let's improve it together, just making them a part of a whole change. Yeah. And the other thing is, of course, leading by example. When I joined the team, I think I was quite lucky to join at a point that we already had, I think back then it was 4 or 5 models live, already bringing a lot of value to the business, and now we have more than 40 live. But you basically show, oh, look, you had some faith in us, we did this for you, and this is how it's easing your life, your processes, and this is the outcome. So it kind of like says more than what any of us can actually go and say ourselves in words. So yeah, definitely from person.
I think on that point, for companies like LV and Tesco Bank and other, I don't know, like mainstream banks and other retail industries, their biggest USP is customers put a lot of trust in them because they've built this credible reputation over years, which the new, I don't know, the new startups don't have as of yet. And I don't think they ever will, because they are proud of being data-driven, as they should be, I suppose. But this additional layer of having a genuine philosophy and having people in place to make sure that everything is in check, I think that gives the end customers a lot of reasons to put faith in that particular company as opposed to other ones. Yeah, I mean, it's good to be data-driven, and we should all be data-driven, but there needs to be an element of, should we trust the process or what you're actually doing with that data? And if you have these, functions in place, which I don't think if you were to be truly data-driven, you would have them in place, because you would just be like, let the data run, do its thing. Yeah. If you can add that function, which a lot of mainstream companies do, I think that makes customers really, trust them.
Yeah, I guess the key there is just do not lose your values do everything you're doing around those values, and then the customers would actually be quite pleased in the end, because at the end of the day, you improve your processes and improve the way you serve them. But again, like, quite important not to lose your values in the process, definitely.
Yeah.
And for the cases where, I mean, all of us have huge delivery focus, and when there's a big delivery push, there can be a technical debt. There may be a technical debt. What do you think about it, and what are the mechanisms that you have in place to avoid that from happening? Who's taking that?
My take on this is that you need to be smart about what you use third parties for, what you can effectively outsource, and what you do yourself. So if something's really standardized, then there's probably going to be no value in kind of replicating that. But if something's kind of really core to your business, it requires a lot of customization. I think you'll probably get to a point where you spent all this time using this kind of third-party tool, and you've kind of reached the limitations of it, and you need to go further, you need to go deeper, and maybe you would have been better just investing that time from the beginning, working on that yourself from scratch. And ultimately that's your IP if you manage to do something better or that's a little bit unique. So
I think, from my perspective, a lot of technical debt goes hand in hand with the, I guess, human resources which are available at your workplace. I think we need to start, what I think we should see developers and people working in projects just as important as the technical debt itself, because these developers should be, they should be the ones, in theory, they should be the ones making the calls on what the technical debt should be, because they have the first-hand experience of, how a model is going to operate, what the data sources are going to look like, how the data is going to be transferred to these models. I think we should start seeing the talent and the skills that the human resource brings with them on the same level as the technical debt of a particular problem, and maybe improve recruitment. I've seen it happen firsthand. I've seen in companies, new skills coming in, new talents coming in, and the problems that were previously being put down to the lack of technical capability available at the time was resolved in one way or another by new crafty things, more specialized skills that weren't available at the workplace before. Yeah.
And I would probably add to that about taking time. Yes, delivery can be pushing, but best practices and technical excellence is probably equally as important. So just make sure embedded in your timelines in a way to clean the code, adhere to the standards, maybe look into, definitely look into packaging up the code that keeps getting reused across the team, unit testing, and creating all of these best practices around all of your processes would probably, I'm not saying put everyone in a template, because we need that creative thinking in the data science space. Again, we're taking that as an example, but also just sticking to setting up some best practices together with the team and sticking to it together also helps a lot, especially as the team gets bigger and bigger and bigger, documenting all of that and that.
I say don't be scared to talk to your project manager. Tell them that you need, ask for 4 days if you actually need 2 days. Because in the end, you will actually need 4 days. So don't be scared to ask for a long time.
Yeah.
I swing one way and the other. Start underestimating, and then I overestimate. Never get it right.
Well, you just average it out.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'll just ask one more question. Ooh, which one should we end it with? And then we can basically get your questions and hear your thoughts on the topics I've been discussing. Okay, the final one. Are there any ethical or managerial concerns that you are seeing with the increase in the way companies use data? And what can companies do? What can we all do to address it in our day-to-day practice?
I think it's really important to be transparent about what you're doing. If you're very customer-facing, one thing that might be really helpful to one person actually seems a bit creepy to someone else. So I think you have to provide that information about how you've done what you've done and allow people to opt out, gain their consent there. And then also I think one of the best things you can do is, if it's possible for you, is make sure that their data never leaves their device. So I'm working on an app at the moment, something that we can do. Brings additional challenges because then you have to make sure all your models are efficient enough to deploy them onto the edge. But if you can, that's it's a gold standard.
Yeah. So from Tesco-based perspective, there are, I would say, 2 strong and ethical take within the company, because I think Tesco has spent many years trying to build the trust that the customers have in them, and they are not willing to lose that over any amount of profit, I suppose, which can get annoying at times because it limits you in what you can do. But I think more from a technical perspective, I think the explainability debt and this idea that the models need to be well governed and all of that jazz. I think there are, at least I've seen that there are works around it where that debt is now sometimes being put on the data engineering part of it as opposed to the model building part of it. So it's completely possible to come up with embeddings from your data, which I think from a regulatory perspective don't need to be explained. And those embeddings can have anything in them, and nobody would know what it is, and you don't actually need to explain it. And you can just use that as input to your model, and then explain how the model is working based off that embedding. But the problem itself is sort of lost. Yeah, you basically, you've basically diluted the entire problem, and you'll get away with it. But I think you shouldn't get away with it.
No, I think it's quite a good point. The things that you can get away with, but you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think the more these types of discussions are happening, the more it's actually pushing everyone to think more about these different problems, that, at what stage you can introduce bias, make those checks throughout your analysis phase, and then keep checking that when you have your models live, have a very open conversation with your stakeholders, and then how to kind of, again, relay that message back, how to be wary about it when the model is running. I think having these conversations quite open and having a framework, personally, I think, in place to do those checks, make sure, everyone working in your team is doing those checks, is also, I personally think, quite crucial. But yeah, definitely.
It's interesting what you say. It's kind of like a form of encryption, isn't it? Or hashing,
exactly.
it into an embedding. It's not human readable, but
and nobody checks it at any point.
Yeah.
You can get away with it completely.
Oh, yet. Oh, yet.
Not yet.
But at some point.
If the laws catch up.
Or the internal best practices might catch up first. Someone in the team might actually say, well, hey guys, we need to actually add an extra check here or extra controls here, or a way to at least flash it out in the process and make sure what it's doing, or are we introducing anything.
It depends what you've done. It depends how reversible it is, what you've done.
Yeah,
can you turn it back into that regulated information or not?
Yeah, definitely. Well, any comments or questions from yourselves? Or is everyone asleep?
Comments. Graeme, you talked earlier about, said that having data scientists embedded in teams, which is, I understand where you're coming from with that, and I think it's actually a good thing. But there's the potential bad thing there, which is, when I first joined, when I first started in my job, we're a very large organisation. We have data scientists dotted around all over the place who weren't talking to each other. People busy reinventing the wheel without awareness of each other. So I was just wondering. Things have changed a lot since I joined, and we've got an active data science community, and so that kind of problem should hopefully be a thing in the past by now. So I was just wondering what your comments on that are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think an interesting structure to have is like kind of almost like two types of teams. You can have kind of actual kind of working teams where they're cross-functional, and then at the same time you also have kind of functional teams that come together for learning things from each other, solving problems maybe. Those kinds of conversations I think are very useful.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that again in terms of like how teams are formed. A bit like from our side, we have project teams, and the project team will have the business stakeholders with the domain experts and the data scientists and data engineers working on it. The one good thing about that, like internal consultancy style, I find personally quite interesting, is for one project you can be working on a claims project, but your next project might be pricing. So it also changes, and as a data scientist, I also find it quite interesting and exciting. And then when you have, for example, the project kickoff sessions within the team, so some of my teammates who've worked on, say, like a pricing project before can say, oh, actually, I had that problem before, come and talk to me, or there's this code base that is ready to reuse, so you can kind of like share that knowledge again within the team. And also can like not jump between, but finish it, but move between different business functions. And I personally find it more refreshing. I don't know what you would think, but
I've actually moved the organisation a couple of times, and now the team is sort of working across the whole sort of customer marketing, e-commerce domain, but it's a small team, and we do work with other teams. There are other data science teams around, but there are also individual data scientists embedded in some teams. So it's evolving in quite an interesting way, I think, because we have the active community, and we have some teams of data scientists, but we've also got data scientists. We've kind of got a mix of both.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, quite interesting setting.
But then it does mean that, for example, I certainly I initially started in the commercial analytics section of the company, and then digital analytics now.
Right.
Down in a different section again, and so again that means you end up working on different problems. Which is a good thing, because you get to see a sort of cross-cutting view of the company that's very valuable when you're trying to do this work.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. Can we get one more question, or are we done this time? One more short question.
If someone wants to ask a question.
No pressure. Everyone's hungry.
We must have done a good thing.
Oh, sorry, there's one.
One kind of notion that gets a little bit lost in business called cities of data scientists. And I just wanted to, a lot of people with data science and technical background are very skeptical about this. What's your opinion on that? Like empowering business folks not necessarily having this sort of technical backgrounds with some tools that can give them opportunity once the models are all gives some opportunities right there.
I think if you elaborate how far you want to take this citizenship from your perspective, or at least from the point that you're taking, then maybe we'll be better suited to answer. Like, how far do you want to take the citizenship? So what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting the higher up should run these models, and so we enable them technically to run these models and then interpret the results, or actually have a communicator between the technical and non-technical audience?
No, so imagine you have the tools like these are all those and let them use their data sets on their own.
So might be viable for some companies, but not all companies are as open source, or they might be ingrained in specific ecosystems like Azure or AWS. And at that point, it's possible. Yeah, you definitely could. I think your higher-ups should already have some level of literacy. The point I was talking about data literacy earlier on, it should happen at all levels and all hierarchies in your organization. So personally, I don't think they need to be able to run the model, but I think they should be able to interpret the model. They should be able to interpret the results that they're getting. They should be able to understand the nuances which are hidden within the results. I think they should just trust the developers that they're not messing up running the model, or they're not pressing the incorrect button or something like that. But yeah.
I think it's difficult. We're probably not quite there yet, but yeah, to say like eventually someone will invent some awesome piece of software like Excel or Photoshop that's going to allow people to just go away and completely do these things themselves. But I think at the moment it still does require a bit kind of technical knowledge that it's difficult to impart to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's more I guess you would need a certain level of business analyst level knowledge. So even if you might not know how to implement that in Python. For the sake of argument, let's pick that. Or you don't know the nitty-gritty by all the maths behind how the model runs. You still need to know what are the assumptions required for that model, and how does the underlying data assumptions, for example, should be, because you might be using that model, but the results then won't be reliable if you don't know how you're using it. So I would say there would be at least a basic level of understanding to do that, not necessarily hard coding the models or doing all the maths, but the understanding of what the models are doing and what the assumptions are, what the limitations are. So you're not overestimating or underestimating, or just misinterpreting, basically, in short, the outcome is what I think.
I think usually, at least the practice at Tesco Bank is every project has associated documents with it, which even non-technicals can look into and should be in a place where they can, well, at least interpret the results. Not run the Python code, because Python might not be on their laptop. Like, it's completely possible. So
Yeah. Documentation definitely helps.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely, and level of explainability, because in our case we have quite a lot of models with a human in the loop, so they need to understand what's happening. They're not running, but they're getting the model outcomes into their source system, so they have that. And we also have a few new roles created, more like a translator, like we were discussing, and those translator roles also help us getting use cases across the business, because they have a better understanding of how can a data science team can help you, rather than it's a piece of, you actually need an extra bit of data in your project. So that also helps massively, which is kind of linked to what you were asking, if not exactly what you were asking.
Yeah, thanks. I have very similar thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I guess we're out of time.
Yeah,
Everyone wants to have lunch.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that was great, because it also bridged the gap between some of the more academic talks earlier, and now practically you can see what's happening inside business. So I think that was very informative. Thank you.